Welcome to the Rabbit Trails podcast. I am one of your hosts, Barrett Harkins. On the other end of the line is Garrick Regner.
Hello.
Hey, man.
Hola.
Listen, we just realized this is now I guess this will be our 8th episode by the time this comes out. A whopping 8 episodes. Garrick, when we get to 10 episodes, we're going to have to throw a big party, right?
A party,
Because
yes.
we made it. We've defied the odds.
It's pretty.
It's actually kind of fun.
Yeah.
But what I was thinking was, we have failed to mention, normally at the beginning of this thing, the name of the podcast, which is the Rabbit Trails Podcast, which I did a Google search, and it's actually one of some rendition of the Rabbit Trails Podcast. There's Rabbit Trail, there's Rabbit Trails, there's the Rabbit Trails Podcast. Incidentally, we don't easily come up, so we're going to have to fix that. We're going to have to get some kind of technical wonder out there to help us with that. But as of right now, if someone searches Apple iTunes for the Rabbit Trails Podcast, you can find us. And if you find us, we would love it if you would leave us a 5-star review. If you don't like us, don't worry about it. Just hope you have a great day, and really, thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, thanks for coming in.
Keep walking that. No, actually, yeah. So we would love it if you could spread the word a little bit. It's kind of a fun little thing we're doing, and if it's providing value to your life in missions or with Christ, because that's our goal. So anyway, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, let the real fun stuff begin.
Let's do it.
Garrick, it's hard to go through life right now thinking that there is something not right in the world because it's beautiful outside, flowers are in bloom. Everything feels right in the world as opposed to wrong, but nonetheless, things continue to be as they are. Places are opening up. Y'all are opening up in Spain.
Yeah, things are looking better. You can go outside now. Soon restaurants will open up. You can go in, and you can't necessarily yet go in, but you can sit on the terrace, which outdoor seating in Spain is a huge deal.
You guys got great weather for that.
Yes, we do. It's starting to get nice and warm and really pretty outside. So yeah, things are looking good. I think there's hope.
Yeah.
There's a U2 song that says always dark before the dawn. So we've been through the dark. Hopefully we're starting to see the dawn, and there's a lot of hope and for the future.
There's a U2 quote for nearly everything, isn't there?
There is. Thanks.
Hey, have you ever seen a few years back when they released the I guess it was like 30 or whatever Joshua Tree album anniversary it was, and they were kind of going on a tour, and they went on Jimmy Kimmel and played Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For.
Yeah,
and performed
with
it with have you seen that clip on YouTube?
Yeah.
So I absolutely love it. When I preach or teach, I love using clips of music because I think music stirs the soul, and part of preaching and everything is stirring the soul. But and so I've used that one often and absolutely love it. But there is a scene, or not a scene, but there's a couple in the crowd that are just like, you can tell they were just so excited to be there when U2 was there. And then the fact that like, oh my gosh, they're singing live and it's this interactive thing. And so Bono kind of comes up to him and he gets kind of close, but then he kind of turns and he's singing to the camera and stuff. And you can kind of see him. And I wish this is where this was like a video podcast, but like the guy and the girl are kind of clapping, really into it. And they kind of lean forward to kind of touch Bono. And halfway there, they're like, I can't touch Bono on live television. And so they kind of pull back and they're just awkwardly trying to figure out what to do. I'll send you the link. It's awesome. Every time I watch it, it's
I have a friend actually who met Bono and the Edge in the Nairobi airport.
No way.
Yeah, they were
Bucket
there.
List right there.
Yeah, I know. He was on a trip. They're going to Uganda to he was the campus pastor at our home church in Dallas, and he was going to Uganda to check out a project that was working with former child soldiers. And so they were flying through Nairobi, and so they're getting ready on their flight, and someone comes and goes, I just saw the Edge and Bono and their families, and they walked into the VIP lounge, and they all ran over there hoping they would, maybe they'd catch a glimpse. But then I think one of the guys said, I'm never gonna get this chance again. So he just goes into the VIP lounge, and they walk, kind of were able to strike up a conversation, and said, just really nice guys, and had a great conversation, took pictures with them. And
wow.
They were really, really, really encouraging, really friendly, and made a lot of jokes with them. But they only got to talk to for like 5 minutes because their plane was literally getting ready to leave. So
yeah, the Bono really was impacted by Eugene Peterson's work.
Yeah,
and the message, and they actually had there's that video on YouTube of them meeting together and talking about the Psalms and different stuff. And I always had this not secret. I mean, I microblogged about it on Facebook one time, but I always hoped that somehow Bono would collaborate with Eugene Peterson on a Psalms album.
Yeah.
Because I just thought that would have been, to have Eugene Peterson, who had such cool insights into how to say it, but then Bono, who also, had these insights. I think, man, it would have been awesome, but never happened.
There's a rumored, they were working on an album at one point called Songs of Ascent, which obviously would have been very biblically tied into Psalms, but it was kind of at a time when they were working on 3 or 4 projects, and I don't think that one really came to fruition.
That's a bit of a bummer. That would have been awesome.
But maybe there's some songs back there that'll come out someday. They always like to release those bootlegs with all the unrecorded songs,
right? The basement sessions.
So someday,
There's actually a song with Marcus Mumford on the Bob Dylan basement sessions.
Oh, really?
Basement tapes. Yeah, they found these basement tapes of Bob Dylan's or whatever that he had recorded. Because the guy's recorded millions of songs or whatever, and he just kind of throws them away because he doesn't like it or whatever. But they decided that they were going to have other people record them, and actually Johnny Depp plays on the song. But there's a song, Kansas City, that Marcus Mumford recorded on this album. It's a fantastic song. I love it. But I'm a huge Marcus Mumford and Mumford & Sons fan.
Yeah. Well, there's 2. So we've been talking about. I know we have a topic for the day, but maybe we can go down this rabbit trail for a second. But
this is the Rabbit Trails podcast. Leave us a 5-star review.
Christianity in Europe, we've been talking about, and so right there you have Marcus Mumford and U2, 2 people who a lot of people would go, they're not Christians, but who actually are very serious Christians. Marcus Mumford, of course, his parents were at one point the directors of Vineyard UK. The entire denomination, and of course Bono and that group, came out of a evangelical kind of Pentecostal background, but fascinating that even in in a time of great secularity, you still have some some people who are making some, I would say, in many ways, Christian art, or art that reflects a lot of Christian values, and it's high quality too. It's not It's not typical kind of.
Well, I think disproportionately you tend to find, like someone was talking about one time, and I don't know if this is a true statistic or not. Sometimes I speak so authoritatively on things and I got no clue. That's how you get a podcast, right? That's right. No, actually these days you just start a podcast.
But lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Yeah. Okay. So do you have, that reminds me of another story. So my brother, his father-in-law, so his wife's stepdad, is a very well-known statistician at a university on the East Coast. I probably shouldn't name it, so then people would track it down, and he may not like that I said this, but he is often fond of saying there are lies, damned lies, and then there's statistics. Yeah. And he teaches statistics, right? So he, he has that view. But anyway, where was I going? We're
talking about U2 and Marcus.
Oh, yeah. So someone once said, though, that the proportion, the number of participants who did really well, so not necessarily won, but did very well in shows like American Idol, often have some kind of church background, because if you have talent, churches are always in need of putting someone up on stage. And so I'm not saying that necessarily these people aren't believers, but that they grew up in the church, and by virtue of being in the church also got opportunity to sing and hone their craft a little bit. And I think you probably have in the arts, specifically in song, you probably have a disproportionate number of believers in it, or people who grew up in the church, proportionate to the rest of everybody else. Like if we're, 3% evangelical Christian, even in Sweden, one of the most well-known artists of the last 25 years is a very well-known Christian. So I think it just happens. I mean, y'all in Agape Spain used to have, I don't know if they're still on staff, but there was a rap
Praxis,
group or
hip hop group that was really well known, very professional, and they're not on staff anymore, but still connected, still producing music and but you're right, they were all pastor kids, with a love for hip hop. Yeah. But they also studied at a conservatory, and so that's a very interesting. I think that would be interesting to look at. So I saw an article the other day that was also fascinating. It was on Gospel Coalition about like 10 Christian composers, like classical music composers.
Oh, interesting.
That are Christians, and and it was fascinating because I do not really spend much time in the world of classical music.
Townes Van Zandt is classical, right?
Well, classic.
Oh, classic. There's a difference. Okay.
Yes. One of the greatest songwriters ever. But the number of composers, and particularly European composers, which I found fascinating. Yeah. Even a guy Arvo Part, who's a Estonian. Right? He's quite old now. He's in his 80s, but he was a very famous, apparently, classical composer. Did soundtracks also for stuff.
Really?
But fascinating.
One of a very well-known artist in Estonia is a very strong Christian. Actually, one of his paintings is hanging up. He did a portrait for my mother-in-law of my niece. Wow. He had my wife's aunt here in Sweden started doing some work with different organizations in Estonia and helping young kids and disadvantaged kids in Estonia, and through that got to know this guy Apo Puk, and of course in Estonia it's a really small community. Yeah. But anyway, and so he ended up in the U.S. and he, through the connections, because my mother-in-law is Swedish, and the Swedish community is kind of one of these things, especially back in the day. It's less so now, but like when you were traveling to Los Angeles and you just kind of put feelers out of like, hey, do you know of anyone who lives in Los Angeles? And my mother-in-law is a very social person, and so she knows a lot of people, and so they'd always be like, yeah, you should call up Anne Marie Vance. Well, so people wouldn't just call her up before they left. Sometimes they would just like come by the house.
Yeah.
They'd be like, can we stay? And they're sure. And so she had all these people. So anyway, so it was kind of one of those deals. She had him over, and he ended up painting a portrait of my niece, and it's hanging.
Oh, that's so cool.
Hanging up in her living room. Mm-hmm. So, and this guy's done royalty in Europe and just different stuff. Yeah. So it's kind of a cool deal.
I think it's, when growing up in maybe an evangelical context, we were always kind of, I think this may be unfair, but we were kind of taught that, well, there really aren't any Christians in the arts.
Yeah.
And the reality was, no, there's a lot, actually. There's a lot of people who follow Jesus who make great, and when I say art, I mean great art, like art that is considered,
it stands alone on its own, not like what is it, Fireproof, that showed not like Christian production companies.
Yeah.
Which not that there's anything wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with it, but let's just be honest, that's not. It's not going to maybe, okay. We'll leave it at that for now.
It's the difference between Dickey's barbecue and Franklin barbecue. Right?
Yeah, there you go.
Just different quality. They're both
useful. They're both useful. And they just have different, kind of situations. So I think it's just fascinating because, I think, and we carry that dynamic or dialectic of the Christian art, Christian music, and then there's everything else.
Right.
And I think now we're living in a world where I think we got many people who are saying, no, good art is Christian art, or if it's done from a perspective, or maybe that the signifier isn't important. It's not
right.
Good art is good art, and the person who creates it is, their influence is in it. But if they're Christian, they're Christian. Yeah. If they're not, then it can still be good art.
Switchfoot is kind of like that, they were one of those Christian artists that they're just good music. Now they're not headlining major things. I mean, they're still, but they are considered at least decent practitioners of art.
Yeah. Well, let's try and finish here, and then we'll move on to the topic. I think because people are going, "Where are you guys going with this?" Going down a rabbit trail. But you
Welcome
too,
to the podcast.
you two are some of the only people in the world who can get 80,000 people to sing "Amazing Grace" together.
No kidding, right?
Or Hallelujah choruses, and so that's something. Something's going on in that kind of context.
We're actually not going to end there, because your mention of getting 80,000 people to sing "Amazing Grace." So we will come a little bit full circle here with Marcus Mumford. So one of the things that we're doing on Sundays now is we're taking our kids through Phil Vischer's "What's in the Bible" series, and kind of educating our kids about the Bible, and it's just really good, and they're loving it. And so every Sunday we take a book of the Bible or one of the CDs that we have, and we go through it, and then we kind of talk about it, and then we sing some songs together. But none of us are my wife and I are not musically inclined, so we can't hold a tune or play an instrument. And so we put on, some kind of song that we want. So we asked the kids, what do you want to listen to? And so we put on "Amazing Grace" the other day, and it got me to thinking, I want my kids not just to hear like I think we might've done Chris Tomlin's version, which is the version they're most familiar with, but I wanted them to hear the more real version.
Yeah. The hymn.
And And so I remembered that on YouTube there is a Marcus Mumford of Mumford and Sons is at a festival, Bonnaroo Festival, which is more a folk song festival in Tennessee, and he gets up. Good night. He got up Edward Sharp and I forget the name of his band, and the Magnetic Zeros.
That's it.
He gets up. What is the other name of the band? They sing, I'm just blanking on it. Anyway, a bunch of different bands up there. He's got like 4 or 5 different bands up there, and they all do "Amazing Grace" together. And, I'm guessing most of these guys were not believers, but by the leading of Marcus Mumford, and it was cool because they kept showing the crowd, and you've got all these people who are like having fun and they're going up, but occasionally they would come across, and in the crowd you could see someone just weeping.
Yeah.
And it was like, it was neat to see that they were doing that. So anyway, there's really your cool. There's your full circle.
They're full circle.
Young people at a Bonnaroo festival crying to "Amazing Grace."
Yeah.
And speaking of young people, what brings us to our topic today. So you and I have spent the majority of our adult life on the mission field in some way or another.
That's crazy.
Or at least almost 2 decades each. And we were talking the other day, and I don't remember how it came up, but this idea of what does it take to be successful on the missions field? Now, depending upon the day, I will feel successful or not successful. That is always a relative term to me. But I thought it could be fun today to talk about things that we've learned in order to be successful on the missions field, or we could subtitle this talk, "Young and Stupid to Adding Value."
Adding value. Yeah.
Because when we were first on the mission field, let's be honest, we may have thought we were successful, but we were just young and stupid.
Yeah. And I think if I can precursor this thing, I would say success is kind of relative in ministry, right?
Yeah.
And what success ultimately is faithfulness, right?
Right.
Faithfulness. But then you actually do have to prepare yourself. You actually do have to know what you're doing, and you have to do the hard work, right? Yeah. But the hard work doesn't we're not dependent on the hard work. The hard work is part of the journey. If we can slide it back into pilgrimage, we all know we're getting to Santiago. We all know God's good, but we still got to get up and walk and trust Him. And so, because I feel like success could be a little bit of a misnomer, right? Like, because I'm like with you. Many days and many years, I have not felt necessarily successful.
Yeah.
But now I can look back and go, okay, but that was all part of the story.
Yeah, what is it Mike Schatzman's always, is it Schatzman who always says that you won't get you won't feel like you get much done in a year, and you'll get more than you ever thought possible done in 5 years.
Yeah.
Just kind of that perspective of looking back. And I would say that that's true of my time in Sweden, but also anywhere I've been, is that looking back at the time, it felt like nothing was happening.
Yeah.
And what I would say is I'm talking about the faithfulness of God being evidenced.
Yeah.
At the moment, it rarely feels like God is, like something is going on, like that God is moving or producing or whatever. And looking back, I see evidence of his hand all along. Yeah. Basically, really what we should do at this point is we should read Footprints, and then
I was thinking the exact same thing. Well, there's several like jokes off of that on Footprints.
Oh man.
There was the one on Arrested Development where Steve Holt, his campaign video was, it was 2 footprints in the sand. He goes, "You may wonder why there's 2 footprints in the sand. Well, it's because our first take was horrible, so I had to go back and do it again." But that's, and then he goes into but he makes a good point there, right? But you know, you got to persevere, even when you make mistakes. You got to keep going. So, but it's
That's awesome.
Sorry.
Oh, we should do it. We should just talk about Arrested Development.
Arrested Development one time.
Such a great show. Yeah. So I think interesting. I just finished yesterday. I just finished my degree at Dallas Seminary.
Congratulations.
And it felt so good. Did not expect. I was a little bit taken back by how good it felt. But anyway, done with that for a while. We'll see if we eventually do a doctorate or something. If I got it in me, I'm not sure I do. But I'll say this. We closed up my last class with hearing from 3 different pastors in very different contexts and talk about leadership. So I was taking a leadership course and finishing that up. And each one of them got about an hour and a half each. And they talked on leadership. And each one of them had incredible things to say. The wisdom, I think the person who had been in ministry the least was 27 years or something. So people who have been faithful and endured. The first 2, though, came from very large churches in the Dallas area. So very large in the Dallas area, we're talking 2,500, 3,000 people. And they talked about their success, and oftentimes they were talking about numbers. So we increased our budget, we saw this many baptisms, or we saw this thing or that thing. And I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that. They're definitely a success. The last guy who came up, I think, a very, very successful person in his life, had done business things, had done different things. But he was a pastor of a church of 900 people. Now, 900 people is a lot of people. Yeah. But by Dallas standards, it's a medium-sized church. And I tell you what, his wisdom might have just been his personality. I don't know. But I think it might have something to do with the value that he was experiencing or that he was creating in a context of 900, when everywhere around you considers mega church to be success. The wisdom that he was giving us was just solid gold. And it was so different. It wasn't did you hit your metrics or whatever else? It was, every story he would tell was, this is how someone came to know Christ more. And so that's when we talk about value, or we talk about success or whatever, I think that to me, at least that's what I want to be my marker. I confess that I struggle with, if I'm honest, I struggle with, when I picture in my head what success is, I struggle with it thinking it's a certain number of people. It's a Billy Graham rally or a mega church or whatever else like that. I have the vanity, I have a case of the vanities, and so I have to really fight that. But as I've looked back over what it means to be successful as a missionary, I do think that it really does mean, are you remaining faithful? And I think we'll talk about this more, I think, because I think it'll come up, but I think we're going to all be surprised when we're standing before the Lord and he's rewarding those, and the missionaries that no one, or the faithful moms and dads that no one knew about, are the ones that he says, look at this person. Yeah. They remained faithful. And it might even be a few people that the world judged as drunkards, or, people who couldn't hack it or whatever else. But when no one was looking, they were fighting a good fight. So I think just as frame of reference, at least that's how I'm convinced that's what success means. But
yeah, the first will be last, and the last will be first. It's very radical, and I think we have to take that very seriously. I think I think this maybe is acute on one hand when you're starting out, and probably this is probably true for any business or any ministry. I mean, there's the outliers, right? The guys. There's the guy who started Facebook, right? What's his name? Zuckerberg, right? He's an outlier, right?
Yeah.
He and Harvard hit a home run that turned into this, huge thing. Jeff Bezos. Although I bet if you talk to both of them, they would say a lot of hard work and a lot of patience and a lot of sticking to what you're going over many years. But those are guys who very quickly climb to the pinnacle of success. And so you see that in ministry too. You see some people who pop out and bam. I think as a natural tendency as humans, number one, that's what we want. But also, I think we're living in a society now that demands, immediate success, immediate results. And I, it's one of those things where I think in ministry, but particularly in being a missionary, being a cross-cultural worker, there's a steeper, there's a learning curve in anything. I mean,
right.
Most of the guys who are really good at sales, they didn't do that at 23, 24. Some of them probably weren't even allowed to do sales, until they worked.
Totally.
So I think sometimes we forget that because we're anxious, we're in a hurry, and part of that's good, but part of that can be really dangerous because then, you can jump out of something before you should.
Yeah.
And then you miss. Like there were so many times we wanted to jump out, early, and we said, well, it seems like God's saying we should stick around because this is happening, or there's this guy, we can't abandon this guy yet. See what happens.
So when were those times when you say that, when were those times? Are there specific things you think back to?
Yeah, certainly. I'll just reference real quick Mike Schatzman, who wrote a short little article called Mission It's Hard, which I think is key, that this is hard. It's hard stuff. But there were times, the first couple of years where you're just like, things are not going well, especially when you move overseas with a kid and then start growing that family, and you're trying to figure out where do I go to the doctor, and then there's all the other stuff going on, and you have bad days where you just say the wrong things and do the wrong things, or you don't even understand, but things have gone bad because you did something. You have to grow in that capacity, but so there were definitely lots of times when you're like, maybe we should call it a day. And to be fair, there are times when you should call it a day. So, you got to
sure.
that.
Yeah. There's people who've left the field who it was a good decision. So
decision.
Just sticking it out isn't always true success.
Yeah. And you need a community to help you think through those things.
Right. You
need people who can, talk you through and not be out on your own. Because it can be a very isolating experience. And so, but when you work through those, and I think you do the right things, and even, you have the opportunity to look back and see where God did work and what was going on.
Yeah. I tell you what, I remember living in Central Asia, and one that God would use, idiots such as myself. I remember times that we thought we were being so successful, right? So we got it in our head, our team got it in our head of like, hey, here's this like real hip, cool kind of hamburger joint that, we all love going to or whatever. Let's just treat our, we had about 25 students that were really engaged with us that were kind of a core group or whatever. So let's just treat these students to this really cool place to eat. They never get to go here. It's going to be so much fun, everything else. And so we treat all these Central Asian students to this, not realizing that basically what we had done was we had just insulted every single one of them with basically saying, you guys can't afford anything and we can. And we're the time that my Central Asian friend came to the door, and I had invited him over for dinner. And he came to the door and he said, I said, hey man, glad you're here. Are you hungry? I made some food. And he goes, nope, not hungry. I was like, what do you mean you're not hungry? And he's like, I'm not hungry. I already ate. okay, well, do you mind if I eat? And then we sat down and he ends up eating. And I was like, well, you don't have to eat if you're not hungry. No, I'll eat. So a couple years later, I asked him, I said, hey man, what was that about?
Yeah.
And he said, well, Barry, I'm going to be honest with you. In my culture, if you're hungry, there's a lot of people who are hungry, but it's not because they haven't eaten or they just didn't get around to eating. It's because they didn't have the food or the money. And when you ask, are you hungry? In my mind, what you're asking me is, are you poor?
Yeah.
And so I have to say, no, I'm not hungry, because if I admit I'm hungry, it admits that I don't have any food. Yeah. And so I think there are all those lessons. So one of the things that I think it takes to be successful in a cross-cultural situation is just a willingness to observe and to recognize and to ask questions, to make mistakes. I think I have made more mistakes in my days, and I'm not just talking about big mistakes. When people talk about mistakes, it's kind of like, I don't know. I invested in an Atari last week. Like that's a mistake. But actually, they're probably on their way up again. Someone's going to me. Actually, Barrett, the ROI on Atari is pretty high. But okay, that's a mistake. No, I'm talking about things which are. I think they have the potential. So you constantly run this risk in being a missionary of just being slightly offensive enough as to be off-putting, and you're undoing any trust that you could have done. So when you kind of refuse to, my name is Barrett, and people would mispronounce my name all the time. And at one point, someone called me Bird. So it went from Barrett, Bird. It just became Bird. And I just kind of had to embrace it, because it's like, you don't want to be that person that's like, my name is Barrett, It's Samantha, not Samantha. It's just like, those aren't good ideas. But you constantly run that risk of being just offensive enough to undo the message that you're trying to say or trying to communicate. And so I think one of the lessons I think that I've learned that it takes is you have to be willing to gently walk a line. My defense of my country or my country's politics is not the most important thing.
Yeah. It's the concept of the incarnation, right? That love came down in human form to communicate, Jesus to communicate God's love for us in human form. And that took an amazing amount of humility, right? And so when we go into another culture and we're trying to take on that culture, number one, amazing amount of humility, to be a learner, just to really work hard at understanding the culture and understanding that, hey, this is different. All those things are, learn the language, learn the culture, and that took time. That takes time for us. And for God, I guess it was a lot easier, but for us, it does take time. Although for Jesus, it was painful. It was painful.
Well, I mean, so interestingly enough, he had to learn how to read and write. If he did, I assume he knew how to read and write, but maybe he didn't. Maybe he could read the. He could read the.
You could read the Torah.
But I mean, he had to learn obedience, right? That's what Philippians tells us. He had to learn obedience in the same way we did.
Yeah.
So I think that there is struggle there, and I think that's part of. I think being successful, being faithful, in part requires that we become incarnational. It doesn't necessarily mean that in all cases we, let's say, put on a loincloth. But it can mean that. But it does mean what I think the wrestling that we always have to do is what parts of kind of my expression of who I am are cultural and what parts are, let's say, kingdom or gospel. And even within that, what parts can bend and flex a little bit, because I think that there's room to flex even within a let's say a Christian message. So I'm never gonna bend and flex on the Trinity and Jesus is the only way to God. But I may flex on forms of worship, timing of baptisms, and different things of that nature. So I don't know if you have, if anything comes to mind, I'm dropping this on you. We didn't talk about it before, but are there areas in which, or let me say this. Sometimes I think it's easy to be a learner when you're first arrive in a place, right? So, because everything's new. So you're just trying to, I think one of the most dangerous places I feel in the last few years is things have become old hat to me.
Yeah.
And
you've
so
got competency, basically.
Yeah. Competency can be a real enemy.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes here in my current context, I can just assume I know how everything's going to go, or I know why someone's doing something, and I stop asking those questions that have been so helpful.
Yeah. Well, that's the turn from humility to beginning to have pride, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like, it's probably a huge motif of many movies, right? You see, they got the young, idealistic person who starts out and over time builds up what they want and feels good about things and becomes very prideful and arrogant, and then their fall. So, that's a pretty standard human story. I think there some stuff that might be in the Bible as well.
I kind of wish I could still blame it on being young. I'm not young anymore, though. Right?
Yeah. So we've got the danger of, maybe people look to us and think, we're kind of fit in now. But if I agree, we have to be really careful to keep that humility, that sense of incarnation, of following Jesus in that. Because you're right, it can become, I know what I'm talking about, and that's not a good place to be, because it's good to be competent, but it's not good that competence would create a lack of growth and a lack of humility and a lack of ability to learn new things. So I think it's a real danger. I've sensed that sometimes in my own life as well. Yeah.
Do you have things that I'm not asking for your perfect rundown, but do you have things that you do to kind of check yourself or to put in practice to make sure, like questions you ask yourself or routines you do to kind of make sure, okay, I'm keeping myself fresh in regards to seeing things through proper eyes or different things like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's community is a big part of it, being a part of a community of people who you can really trust and who will give you good feedback. Sometimes as a leader, that's hard because, will people give you really good feedback? So having a wife is really good for that. And then one thing I haven't been as good about it recently, but having like a spiritual director or someone who can kind of sometimes walk you through things, spiritually, I think is a good thing. So
we do some things on teams that we've led and that have been passed on to other teams in our country, but always asking the question, what did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about God? And what have you learned about your context that you're in? Yeah. So usually we would say, when we only had Americans on our team, we would say, what'd you learn about Swedes? But now we're saying the context you're in, because we have, we have Swiss, we have Swedish, we have, we have Swedes who have Russian origin but, married to it gets really complicated. And so I think constantly asking those questions of, okay, I have a good friend who's on staff with us here, Michael Medital, and he's the best question asker.
Yeah, he is.
He just is so curious, and half the time he'll text me throughout the day or whatever, and I'd be like, hey, why do you think this? He'll text me a picture, and he's always asking why, and I've never seen someone so he is insatiable when it comes to asking why.
Yeah.
And I think that asking why, he has been one of the most successful people in cross-cultural context that I've ever seen of beginning to understand a matter. And I think that from young, and if we want to talk about from young and stupid to adding value, I think one of the things that probably changed in me somewhere along the way was I realized, one, the missionary endeavor in this country or in this context did not start with me. So I've entered, let's call it the pilgrimage, or let's call it the journey at a certain point, and I'll exit at some point. But and that exit may come with the Lord's return, or it may come, later on down the road. But because it didn't begin with me and it didn't end with me, therefore I've got to ask myself in order to orient myself, where am I along this journey? So, in Central Asia, part of that journey was, Muslim context, but it's a former Soviet republic.
Yeah.
And how does that form someone's response to the gospel? How does it form someone's response to all of these things? And then to realize, well, wait a second, there's been, as I started to meet believers and our staff there who had remained faithful and who were seeing things, so there's always this context that one has to learn and ask questions about. So for me, so recently I've picked up a book on Swedish church history. Which kind of seems like a stupid move to me, because I've been here 13 years and I'm just now getting around to that, but so be it. But getting to enter in and stuff like that, for me, I'm a context is really high on my strengths finders. And so I just enjoy context immensely. So some of those things, but I hadn't thought of the idea of having a spiritual director enter into that. Are there spiritual directors in Spain that you have access to? Or
yeah, we have a guy on staff named Rex Wynn who actually got certified, I believe.
Really?
By Gordon Conwell. Did he go to Gordon Conwell? I think he went to Gordon Conwell. I can't remember exactly, but they had like kind of a spiritual formation, like a lay track that you could do. So he did like 3 or 4 experiences in the States, and he's done it. He's learned a lot. It's like a whole, because it's some of the spiritual direction stuff is coming out. Some in the Catholic world too. It's something that I think it's a little bit new. I mean, I think we've been kind of doing it as Protestant evangelicals, but the intentionality of it, I think most of that comes out of kind of Catholicism. So now it's been adopted by much of the evangelical Protestant
right
world.
Yeah, it was big. It's been big in mainline denominations for a very long time, but finally evangelicals are waking up to, maybe there's value here.
Having someone just help you. So Rex is the only one I know in Aga Bay, but I'm sure there's got to be other people in Crew.
I know there's other people in Crew. I just always wonder here in our European context or even just outside of, I don't think the idea of a spiritual director has hit Sweden very hard yet, but I don't always have my finger fully on the pulse of things. There may be parts and stuff that do have that, but I think that there's true value to be had there.
But I think you bring up a really good point there about learning. I think you have to always be learning something, or learning and growing and realizing that, I mean, it's a one thing. You kind of live in this world where you're kind of always on your back foot a little. Even as you feel more comfortable in the culture and speaking the language and doing work and ministry in that context, you're still not 100% at your capacity. I mean, some people might be able to get there, but I still haven't gotten there. I still feel stretched or sometimes confused. I mean, I feel confused a lot, but
that's more of a personal problem.
That's personal issue. It's a personal issue. But within the cultural, so I think you're right. You got to go in with a learning attitude, a humble attitude, and I think maintaining that as long as possible is really one of the things that's going to help. I think a word I would pull out, and I think we were talking about 2 words that pull out are perseverance and patience. I think we were kind of touching on this. You got to stick with it. Things are going to fail. Things are going to go bad. And you got to really ask the question, okay, is this where God has me right now? And then you do have to have patience, because you can't learn a new language. You can't learn the whole thing of the culture. It takes time, and you got to experience. You have to have moments of incredible failure. My worst day was like first or second year we were here. So I still was not competent in Spanish. And I went to a hardware store to buy something, and it was a big hardware store, but it had the gates, and I thought they were gates that you like pushed in to go in, those little like kind of waist high gates to go in a store. Well, they were automatic. I didn't know that. I mean, what? And first of all, why would you put automatic gates in that? Anything that swings open. And so this kid was running, a little kid, like 3-year-old, running towards me, And the mom was saying something. I didn't understand what she was saying. So I thought she was saying, hey, my kid's trying to get away. So I keep moving forward. That door swings open and like smacks the kid, falls down. So if you know anything about Spanish culture, the kids are, they're amazing. Their kids are it. Kids can get away with anything, especially 2, 3, 4, 5. People love kids. So everyone starts yelling at me. I don't know what they're saying. And I don't even know how to explain what happened. Nowadays I would probably explain what happened or say, I'm sorry. Or even I would have been a little bit like, I would have maybe been, this is where would the non-humble part of me would have said, I might have said, if I was angry, I said, well, you should take care of your kid. Have him running around the store, And then, but I didn't. And this one guy followed me around and like kind of yelled at me. I mean, it was a very shaming.
Oh my gosh!
And so at that moment, you're like, I just want to get out of here.
Yeah, I
want to leave. I'm done with this country. And I felt horrible because this poor kid. And then everyone's mad at me, and I'm sure it's happened, but that happens to everybody.
Our mutual friend. I hope he would be okay with me sharing this. He's shared it publicly, so I think it'd be okay here. Yeah. In groups bigger than our listening audience, so I think we're okay. But Gary Runn. Yeah. He lived in Italy for a number of years, and he said in the beginning he would have these. I want to get out. I'm having a bad day. He would call it, I'm having at first he would say, I'm having a bad Italy day. Yeah. And it would be like, you just, something ticked him off and then he realized eventually, oh no, I'm just having a bad day. Like something's happened that's caused anxiety or stress or whatever else. And I have to learn how to deal with this. And I think that there are so many things in the beginning of my time overseas, and I probably still do it, but where things happen, depending upon my stress level, that I react to, and I call it, I'm sick of Sweden, or I'm sick of, whatever context I was in previously. But the reality is I'm just, that caused anxiety or stress.
Yeah, sure.
I don't like how I feel in that moment. And so the culture, because I didn't understand the rules, funny, like there were all these things, man, I have so many looking back. So I'm growing in self-awareness, right? So when I was younger, as a missionary, I probably would have been like, no, I'm good, man. I know how to live overseas. There's no problem. I'm not stressed out. Yeah. And it wasn't until I got back to America. I don't remember at what point it was that I realized this, but I realized when I first moved to Central Asia, I would cook, I would cook something. And so like if I would have to make like spaghetti sauce from scratch or whatever, because you can find any pre-made stuff. And so you need to make, and I like cooking. And so it was kind of a challenge or whatever. And so I'd be having students over, a big group over. And so I'd be making vat of spaghetti sauce. And man, I would find myself in a bad mood all day and just not being able to figure it out. And then I realized, I'm stressed about going grocery shopping because it wasn't just like, okay, I got to go buy meat and I got to get these things done. It was, okay, there's a proper way to do this, and I'm never really sure if I'm doing it right. So you got to go to the meat counter with the right number and talk to the right person and say, one time I went to buy chicken and I told them how many, how much weight I needed in chicken. And they kind of looked at me like I was a moron. And I was like, come on, I know what I'm talking about. And I walked out of there with twice as much chicken as I thought I should have had. And then I realized, I needed 9 pounds of chicken and I ordered 9 kilos of chicken. Yeah,
nice.
I have 20 pounds. I have 20 pounds of chicken 20, as opposed to 9 pounds of chicken.
Yes. I never ended with 20, but I've doubled.
Because 9 pounds of chicken is a heck of a lot of chicken. So you walk out with 20 pounds of chicken. It's like, what does this guy need here? Just different stuff. And so I just remember realizing I'm just kind of stressed all the time.
Yeah. And that's probably another thing to mention is like, it's a stressful job and we're normal people, right?
Yeah. Speak for yourself.
Yeah. Well,
I'm abnormal in a lot of ways.
Normal Texans. Well, I mean, we go through the same stuff. Yeah. So I had a professor who's now president of a major seminary. So I won't mention his name, but he was a missionary in Europe, in Eastern and Western Europe for a while. And he's a great guy. Amazing. So when he told the story, I remember it was kind of a penny dropping for me before, I ever left America. but he's talked about, he's just not, they were early in the field. They were not doing real well. Just things were stressful. He's out for a jog, and these group of kids started going, hup, 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 hup. Now, if you, in Europe, that means like, go, go, right? It means it's like, hey, go, go. They were kind of like, they were just having fun and going, go, go. But he took it as they were making fun of him. So he stopped and yelled at them and gave them the finger because, he was so stressed out. And so he was the level of culture stress, right? The level of culture stress. And then you throw on ministry stress, throw on family stress, all that, made him react in a way that he would not normally and did not want to react, And so you're in a very discombobulated state often, especially in early years. And you've got to get through that and continue to move forward. But also, I think what it means is you've got to give yourself a lot of space and grace and time to decompress and time to do the things that give you life. That was, I remember sometimes I like to travel. So early on, it was our third or fourth year, and just going to the beach. And we stayed in this crappy apartment. It was horrible, really. We look back at it, it's not. And it wasn't anything special, but I just remember that week's kind of it felt like it saved my life to go to the beach for a weekend. It was cold. You couldn't even go in the water, but to be by the beach, to have time alone, the time to just relax. You got to do that for yourself. You have to give yourself that space. And if you're leading people who are going through that, you got to give them the space to do that.
I think one of my lowest moments as a human being, it was actually not long ago, because my daughter was learning how to ride her bike. She's 7 now. She's probably been riding for 2 years. So it was about 2 years ago. And I would say that this time period was probably one of I was looking back, this is my stories. I think I probably came out of burnout, but just recently, like less than 10 months ago, maybe less than 6 months ago. I mean, honestly, I took off some time in December and January, because I was exhausted, mentally and spiritually exhausted, but so not so much physical, but anyway, so burnout to me is this journey of probably 5 years, maybe more. My son's 9, it could be 9 years. In various waves. It wasn't constant, but what I would say is there was an underlying stress that was building up that I was unaware of, and due to some really complex issues of extenuating circumstances that we had in our organization, as far as learning how to. I never thought that I would move overseas and become an expert in tax law, because that's what it required, and different stuff. And
only in Sweden.
That's true. Only in Sweden. But our organization has been nothing but fantastic in all of it. But in the beginning, it was very, very stressful for me. And looking back, I thought I was the one who had to deal with it all. And I made a lot of mistakes. And so I isolated myself and a bunch of other things. Anyway, all that for context of I just wasn't doing well. And I actually thought about this the other day of how terrible I was doing. And I was going through this period where I was just snappy, right? And so anything and everything, I mean, I was ready to snap on people. And if you're familiar with Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 8, which is called the Challenger. And so, you have experienced a little bit of the prophetic voice that comes out, the Challenger in me that comes out. Well, you put the unhealthy side of that, the shadow side of that, in a burned out situation. And so we're riding to school one day, to my daughter's school, and she's struggling to get up this little tiny hill, right? And so I'm riding behind her or next to her saying, come on, Riley, you can do it, And we're taking up more space than we should. And Sweden's really particular about a person being on the, one side or other of a particular path. And we were taking up both sides of the path. And this old gentleman, probably 75, maybe even 80 years old, was kind of ticked off that we were in his way, and he was riding up behind us. So he kind of dings his bell, which is normal practice. And my daughter, trying to figure out which way to go, because she's young, can't make decisions, kind of goes over to the wrong side. And I say, Riley, come over here. So he's even more frustrated. So as he's going by, mutters under his voice, parents can't, teach their kids how to ride a bike in a proper way, and he kind of, speeds off. Well, that was the worst thing he could have said to me, because here's my Challenger. And part of my personality is that that if I feel someone who is under my protection has been unjustly I get real protective, right? So it goes for my staff. It goes for just anybody that I feel an injustice is now being. My name is Barrett, which means bear-like protector. And that bear-like protector turned on, but I was burned out.
Yeah.
And so I yell out, "Are you kidding me?" in English, because I was just like, what? Yeah. And so I sped up to him. And I start riding next to him, and I start, "What's your problem, man? She's 6 years old. Like, she's learning how to ride a bike. Just give her some patience." I was like, "We weren't in your," and I just went off on him. And he kind of looked at me. He was like, "You're crazy. Get away from me." He was just like, what are you doing? Because Swedes are not confrontational at all.
Yeah.
And granted, I've told this to many people in Sweden. And so I want all my Swedish friends who listen know that I have felt affirmed in you, and that guy shouldn't have said that. I think you were probably very scared of me when I, but my daughter experienced injustice there. He was out of line to have said that. Yeah. But look, at the time, my son was like, he was so embarrassed. He was like, "Dad, would you please stop doing stuff like that? You're just," and at the time I was like, "Look, I'm going to defend my daughter. I'm going to, all this stuff." And as I look back now, I look out, man, I was burned out and I was frazzled. And part of it wasn't just culture. It was, I want to be successful, so those of you at home, I have air quotes, and whatever I wanted to build my kingdom. I wanted to be successful for the Lord. But I also had an idea of what I wanted to see. And were we seeing that? I don't know. But there was all these stresses, both kind of from my family of origin, from my own personal junk, and you always hear the adage, overseas brings out the worst in you. And at the end of the day, what it is, I think what I've come to the conclusion, it's not the overseas part that brings out the worst in you. It's that all of your false supports, your mechanisms of coping that you've learned how to deal with get taken away. Yeah. Yep. So the way that I describe it is, it's like your whole life you've been standing in a crowded, like your Times Square, standing next to an emptying subway in rush hour, and people are rushing by you. And your whole life you've had, when it's coming, and you've had two legs planted. Yeah. Okay. But when you move overseas, what happens is that the rules have changed. So now, without realizing it, you only have one foot planted. Yeah. And so when the same thing that you used to be able to take hits up against you, all of a sudden everything, you get knocked to your rear end. Yeah. And I think that's right. What, so here I was, if I've been overseas almost 20 years. So this would have been 17 years into being overseas. One would have thought that I was quote unquote successful living overseas. And really at the end of the day, what I was unsuccessful at is not necessarily living overseas. I was unsuccessful at walking in the Spirit, of knowing myself, of giving my flesh over to the Lord. And as I reflected, what does it take to be successful overseas? It's the same thing that it takes to be successful in the U.S., but it is a surrendered heart to the Lord. It's walking in His Spirit. It's being self-aware. It's taking your junk to Him and going, repenting every day and realizing, this, that, and the other thing. So anyway, there's my worst moment. I just let
that was great.
The whole world know.
I think you're dead on. That's what it is you don't have those comforts, those things you used to know how to cope with yourself. And I think that's exactly what happens. And you have to either turn more and more towards Christ and work in the power of the Holy Spirit, and more dependence on that. Or sometimes you do have to find other ways to cope, whether it's, chasing after a Swedish guy or, whatever,
not recommended.
Not recommended. But I think that's also part of our journey, our pilgrimage as it is as humans,
Yeah. But I think that's also what Christ went through. In His journey on earth, it was the learning of obedience that He couldn't have. His coping mechanism, if you will, was full dependence upon the Spirit and being connected to the Father. Yeah. It was that relationship. It was Jesus knowing from where He had come and where He was going, stooped down and washed his disciples' feet. You can't do that unless you're secure in who you are and who in his relationship with the Lord or relationship with the Father. And I think that's the same for the missionary. Is you can't do the missionary task well without learning that complete dependence upon him. Now, I don't. There's a lot of people who do it really well. I'm not sure that I'm necessarily one of them, but there is a reality that everyone at every point has that challenge, because that's the endeavor that everyone is on, is will I surrender to the Spirit? Will I give over my quote unquote rights or my self-perceived rights? And that was, how many times have I have I lived my life and I want to take up my right to defend justice or whatever else. I feel offended for whatever reason, culturally, and maybe it's correct and maybe it's perceived. And the Lord calls us to, will you give up your rights?
Yeah, this is exactly right. I think, honestly, this what you just said is gold on a lot of levels about who we are as Christians and what really works, and what God's working in us. I think that's we're all headed in that direction of being stripped of what. To full dependence, and not because I think it's important to be clear. Not full dependence as in some kind of you say dependence. Sometimes it can sound bad, as is almost slavery or submission in a bad sense. But it's full submission, full dependence, because that's freedom. Mm-hmm. Because then that is the freedom to leave behind all this stuff that's actually gunking us up and messing up relationships and our own ability to understand who we are and who God is, and that's where we're all going. To go back to you too, if you want to kiss the sky, you better learn how to kneel, right? So if you want to really know what true joy is, you need to be on your knees in prayer, but also in submission to who real love is and what real love is. So I think,
I think that's
hard. That's really hard.
But it's interesting because I think of all of the times that I've had the most meaningful ministry, and it's the times where now I am the same person entering into every conversation that I have, in the sense that I'm bringing with me the gifts and tools that God's given me and or that I've picked up along the way. So maybe some new method or perception, but otherwise I'm pretty much the same person.
Yeah.
But I have conversations all the time that are strikingly different. And part of it is, am I entering it? Some of the greatest and sweetest times of ministry that I've had have been ones where I've entered it going, God, I am scared out of my wits, or God, I have no clue how to respond. God, if you don't help me here, I'm toast. And all these different things. And how many times over the years has some, student or a friend that I've talked to said, hey, you said this. And I'm like, I said that? And, but if you think back to a conversation that at that point, I think I was probably underneath my breath shortly before that going, Lord, I have no idea how to answer this, but you do. And then if I think about all the times we were doing this, sometimes we'll go out with a camera and interview students. We're just doing a little bit of an experiment today. We'll send you the results or whatever. And so we do. And one time we were doing it and with a video of this one guy, and he and I kind of got into a little bit of an argument. And I had this, now I would say from a apologetic standpoint, I had the better argument, but I lost because I lost him. And I offended him greatly with how piercing my argument was. And I actually, because I had his email, I emailed him back and I said, look, I did nothing to represent the Jesus I was telling you about today. And I'm sorry for that. I never heard from him, but I remember those times as, so that even that posture of how am I going into this conversation, or how am I living my life? I think one of the biggest enemies that we have is familiarity. So it goes back to the whole question of, are you learning?
Yeah.
Familiarity, and I think this applies to any context. When I assume And when I go back to Texas, I know how this is played.
Yeah.
I don't know how it's played because every person that I'm in front of or every situation's a little bit different. I need to have powers of observation open, but I need to have my dependence upon the Spirit complete. And there's a huge difference between those. So I don't know, man. It's I know nothing. Well, parenting makes me feel more incompetent as a human being.
Holy cow.
But being a missionary is also very humbling as well.
Yeah.
We should never get into my parenting advice.
Yeah, me either. For me either.
We tell our kids, we joke around. We tell our kids sometimes we're saving money. When you turn 18, you can go to college or get counseling, but we can't pay for both.
Yeah. You choose. You choose. Yeah. So I think this was a good conversation. We talked about incarnation. We talked about humility. We talked about perseverance, patience. We talked about reliance on the Holy Spirit, taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
Those things. I think those are some good things that I would recommend to anyone new on the field or thinking about going on the field or on the field for many years.
On the field, yeah.
Yeah, for many years.
If you had how would you do Spain differently if you were just entering today, knowing what you know today?
Wow, I think I probably wouldn't have had a team the first couple of years. We had to lead a team. And the first year, it wasn't a bad situation, but we just had a lot of people. And so that kept us away from we learned stuff, but we didn't learn language as quick as we could have.
Okay.
Probably could have learned language, had been fluent. So I think that having to kind of come in and hit the ground running, so to speak, because the way we did it was probably not a good idea.
Why do you think language is important, right? Because that's the big debate. Yeah. We're in a global world. Lots of people speak English, especially university students.
Yeah.
I know Spain's a little bit, you're right. I know Spain's a little bit different, but
Spain's very different. If you don't speak Spanish, you're in trouble. Number one. And number two, because I think there's probably some context. I think if you're going to plant an international church, maybe you don't. But then I think at the end of the day, you still look weird maybe sometimes when the culture looks at you and goes, oh, you haven't learned the language.
Yeah.
But when you learn the language, you say a lot about the gospel, I think. Mm-hmm. That even if you don't do it necessarily, because not everyone's going to there's some people who are amazing at learning languages. And there's some people who, are going to struggle more,
And then there's me.
Yeah. Well, and then there's some languages that are just really hard too.
Yeah,
Spanish is pretty simple, pretty easy to learn from an English standpoint. But I think when you take that effort, even if it's imperfect, I think most people really appreciate it, and it opens up doors. And I think it's really hard to. I understand there's certain places that maybe not is as important to learn language because of the context, the culture, what you're doing. So I'm not saying it's a general, but I think it's not a rule for every place every time, but it's, as a general rule.
I don't know, right? So if we're supposed to be incarnational, and I know that there's debate among that, and what I would say is those who think that you shouldn't have to be incarnational are just wrong. Yeah. But
unless you're in a city, you're in a place because you're doing ministry in another place that's sending out, information, or you just happen to have to. I can understand maybe not have to.
Even then, in your ministry, you still have to be incarnational, right? So you got to. So it doesn't matter if you're living in, I don't know, Belgium, but your target audience is Congolese. Somehow you have to figure out how to communicate, right? So because I think that's the thing is Jesus didn't just come on earth and speak heavenly language. He learned Aramaic and Hebrew. He had to learn that language. That's part of the incarnation is the learning of language. I had an Afghan once tell me, I think I may have shared it on this podcast before, but I had an Afghan once tell me that learn another language, earn another soul.
Yeah, that's a great.
And that's such a great proverb, because what he was saying with that is that contained within language is a culture's struggles. And if you want to understand a people, then you have to understand its struggles, right? And so you understand its mindset, you understand. And so in the acquisition of language, you have to wrestle with nuance. And nuance is there because of the lives that have been lived, right? And so, all these different things. And it's not a perfect recipe, but it is one in which I think in the endeavor of trying to acquire a language and struggle with and making mistakes, one learns, okay, this is what I have to do. One also understands the people that you're trying to communicate with. So if you're communicating with an American, you learn the power. Why do Americans overstate things, right? We exaggerate and all these things. If you reflect on that, and I actually haven't really reflected on that as to why we do that, but we have big personalities, if nothing else, or Swedes are reserved, or whatever else it might be. There are lessons you learn in a language that help you understand a people and its heart. And I think Jesus had to understand that. I think, he was formed by that, and in order to communicate, he had to pick his words wisely. And so I think I personally think that's part of and language doesn't just have to be learning a foreign language. Going from Texas to New York, like New Yorkers say, you have to stand on line. They don't say in line. So it's a different preposition. I'm not saying that you have to learn that, but you definitely stick out if you're in New York as not a native New Yorker, and not that you should always try to look like a native New Yorker. But there are examples of that where you just have to try to figure out what is the best way to communicate. And it's not just words. It's the fears, hopes, and dreams of a people.
Yeah. And that's so that's another question right there. When you I agree 100% with you. But there's a question about incarnation, right? Because incarnation can only go so far. I mean, I think we have to be real careful. Some people can go pretty far and do really well with that. Other people, like for instance, I don't think I need to leave behind my identity as someone from Texas necessarily.
No.
Because I'm in Spain. I think at one point I used to think that I need to almost become to where I am indistinguishable. What I need to do is build a heart that's for Spain. I think maybe there's another thing we didn't mention is I think what you got to this idea of a heart or a soul, but you kind of have to have a heart that beats for the people.
Yeah.
And that's just core to ministry, but particularly, and so I found it's easier to be here because I love people. I love these people. I love this country. I love, these are amazing people as a culture. But the reality that you can't go all the way maybe, but, and you shouldn't, but so it's good. I can still reflect my own Texas culture and identity, but also reflect the part of me that's become Spanish. Yeah. Because there is a part of me that has become Spanish. I don't know how much of it is, and for different people, that's probably a different place. But and maybe this is where we go back to pilgrimage. We're exiles. I mean,
right.
Maybe the other thing we've learned is we are truly exiles. I don't really, as much as I love Texas and Andalusia and Spain, I don't really belong. I belong in some way. I'm still trying to figure this out. Maybe I belong in many ways, but I don't belong in one place anymore.
There's a really great guy that I've gotten to know through my seminary, and he grew up as a third kid, he grew up as a missionary kid.
Yeah,
and he's almost 40 years old, and 3 kids and in his career, and he would confess that he never really feels like he fits in until he's around a bunch of other third culture kids. And I think there's a reality there. It's kind of like Frodo, right? At the end of Lord of the Rings, he doesn't really fit in anymore. Yeah. The wounds that have left a scar, the way it gets presented in the movie, it's this kind of sad thing, but I don't necessarily, it just is. It is a just is thing. Like Frodo's life was worth it, but he can't just go back and pretend that everything is all right in the Shire. But he doesn't begrudge everyone else for feeling that. It's just the life that he knows it. And in some sense, I think for us, when you learn another language or you adapt to another culture, you're not going to ever – it's what Joe Schley said when he was on here. Yeah. Well, I didn't go back to America. I went to America because I'm not the same and America's not the same. And And I think that that's a very true statement. You do acquire the culture, you do adapt to the culture, but there's a great, oh man, you should read this book. It's a total just memoir, not spiritual at all, but it's a great book. It's called I'll Never Be French No Matter What I Do.
Yeah.
And it's about this guy who moves to Brittany in the east coast of France, and it's his story of trying to become French because he loves it so much, and all of his failures, but realizing that's okay, and they accept me for that. They accept me for being American in this French context. I have these wonderful, deep relationships, but it's okay that I'm still American. Like I'm not looking to become completely French.
Yeah.
But now I would say if he never went there and learned the language, that he would be untrustworthy in that context. And so I think that there is that balance there, and there's that difficult thing. And it is that pilgrimage sojourning that you left your front door and you won't return the same person, but you're neither the same person. You're not the same person who left Belgium or wherever it was. Why is Belgium's come up twice today?
I don't know.
Time for some Belgian chocolate or waffles or French fries or something.
Ooh, some French fries.
Or other Belgian products that are wonderful.
There might be something I can think.
So anyway, so I don't know. But I do think that there is that sense of, if there comes a day when and if we return to the U.S., I won't be going back. I'm not the same person. I recognize it when I go back now. I'm not. I don't think and do the same way I did.
Oh no.
For better or worse, but it is, and I think for the most part, the better. So
going to the grocery store is an overwhelming experience in America.
Oh my gosh! When I first came back from Central Asia, right? So I had one type of chip that I could get in Central, because this is it was 10 years after independence from the Soviet Union, but still things had not really developed a whole lot. So there was one type of chip that I could get, salted plain. That's it. And so I come back like the 2nd of July, and on the 4th of July, my family gets together and we're having the 4th of July barbecue. And I'm like, hey, you know what? We need some more chips. Barrett, can you go to Super Walmart and get us some chips? And I thought, sure, no problem. I froze. I didn't know what to do. I counted 250 choices that I had to make, and I was just like, I can't. I called up my mom. I was like, just tell me what to get, because I can't make this decision.
Yeah, I don't know what you want. I can't even find the chips.
Yeah, which is interesting. So we've talked about anxiety, and we can close up soon here. But one thing that I've been thinking about lately actually revolves around that is that there is actually a paralysis and an anxiety that occurs in our world today because we have so much choice.
Yeah.
There's so much variety and so much choice that people are there's a lot of anxiety that's occurring because of it. So it happens with Netflix. Who do I choose? Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, whatever else. But also just the amount of variety there is in food and career choices and everything else really is producing a lot of anxiety in people.
This is a shout out to Danny, our Camino friend. But there's a book by Zygmunt Bauman called Postmodernity and Its Discontents. And he talks a little bit about that, and this is writing a while ago now, maybe 20 years ago, but the over consumerism that we face, and it's so many choices, so many things we could do. It creates all kinds of anxiety and stress.
So I think that's actually maybe a good place to close with anxiety and stress. Actually, no, but saying this, one thing that's been a theme of mine that I think carries through, and this is what it means to be successful as a missionary in any given context, or a follower of Jesus, a pilgrim on pilgrimage in the way of Jesus. And that is that he says, cast all your burdens on me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
Yeah.
And there's something in Jesus that is peace producing. It is on the trajectory of peace. Yeah. Or as another shout out to Danny, he told me the other day, we were talking, and he said, am I trending towards peace? And there is that sense there that if we are walking with him, that anxiety lessens, not because the choices lessen, but because we trust and we know that he is good, right? So we're creating new patterns, and that's ultimately the kingdom coming. So I've actually transformed in a lot of some of my thinking in recent years as what I think successful ministry is. And part of what I've been talking to my staff some about, but I want to talk more about within our small organization here in Sweden, but is that, are we being harbors of peace in the chaos and anxiety of the world?
Yeah.
Is that what we are? Is that what we're trending towards? Is that what we're the trajectory of what we're doing, in that we're giving to others is the person of Jesus Christ and creating peace in the place that they're at? Because I know that I need it, and I know there's such a difference in my life when I'm experiencing that and when I'm not experiencing that, when I'm getting caught up by the world. So there's that. If we think of in terms of culture, right? There's the culture of, okay, I'm going to become Swedish or I'm going to stay American, and I can't do either one of those. I have to become something new. Yeah. And the journey of the Christian is I can't stay non-Christian. And I can't swing the pendulum so far. I have to become something new. That's where that my analogy breaks down. But I do have to become something new, that we're a new creation in Christ Jesus.
Yeah.
And I'm fairly convinced that some of that new creation part, a big part of it, is a sense of peace in the middle of chaos.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah. Well, sir, let's call it quits.
That's good. I think it was a good conversation.
Always a pleasure. What are
Likewise.
Y'all have any big plans for the weekend? Sitting around the house, staying inside.
Dart gun war, I think.
Dart gun war.
Yeah. Nerf. Yeah,
nice.
Yeah.
That's
violence.
Yeah, that's what you do. Garrick and his family have turned into violence in their home. They've been cooped up too long. Oh, that sounds fun, man. Well,
and you guys got anything big?
We do pizza every Friday night, homemade pizza. So we're making pizza tonight, and my son's got some football and stuff like that this weekend. So we'll be doing some of that. So, but tomorrow we're just taking it easy. I'm trying not to. I'm going to sit around and read some books. It's going to be wonderful.
That's nice.
Yeah. Well, dude, I hope you have a great weekend. Until we see you again.
Adios.